my name is Mickey. That's also my POS ID and my RC handle, and you can find me online. I've been in the last, I think, 3 years part of the core dev team of Dancer. I've been very quiet in the last year. I was working on other projects like Panapi and Metacpan in the last 6 months. Mainly, we're doing a big upgrade there. I'll start by thanking Booking.com for sending me over and allowing me to speak to you today. Also for giving the training and sponsoring it, and also sponsoring this event in general. Panapi. So this is not a talk about Panapi. Don't worry, I'm not going to talk much about it. I'm just going to remind you that last year I stood here and gave my first talk about Panapi. Since then I went to a bunch of different Perl workshops and YAPSIs and other places like FOSDEM and Cluj.pm meetings, and talked about Panapi. And it's been quite a while, and a lot of things changed since that talk. We released Panapi. It's out on CPAN, and you can use it. You can look into it. We also deployed it internally at Booking in one of our most critical systems there, internal systems. It's doing good, it's doing well, and hopefully soon we'll have another extension to it by Pete. Yeah, are we ready with that? Are we ready to release?
When I stop drinking so much.
When he stops, don't give him beer, please. Don't feed the man beer. So one of the things that I talked about last year, which I did with Panapi, was I built the server then with Dancer, and some things have changed since. And I know this is a Dancer conference, and we're advocating using Dancer and everything. I hope that I'm not doing very, very wrong thing here. I'm going to talk about how I removed Dancer from Panapi and why. Don't clap. There was a very good business reason to do that. So one of the things that we used Dancer for in prototyping the server in Panapi was because Dancer is very, very good at some things, like the route handling. That took a lot of things from that. A lot of effort was saved just by using Dancer. I did the route handling, the query parameters reading, and all those things. Sorry about that. Mine went black. When we tried to deploy it, we needed to package it internally, and that was not a very good experience because Dancer has a lot of dependencies coming in with it, and we were supposed to install it. It's not only Dancer's fault, it's also our internal packaging system, which we are currently, Sawyer and myself are building an alternative to, was limited in a way that we were, on the one hand, dependent on newer version of Dancer because of Panapi, was making use of query parameters and stuff like that. At the same time, the systems that we were supposed to install it on, they were stuck with an old version of Perl, which we couldn't upgrade, so the system of packaging could not handle the two of them together for the same role. So we got to a point where we started thinking maybe we should not use Dancer, not only because of that, but also because we want to make Panapi available for other frameworks as well. Because why limit the audience? I mean, it's basically a very simple tool, and it can be used in basically everywhere. So I took about one afternoon to rebuild the whole server part from Plaque components, and in like 200 lines of code, which included the documentation lines and the empty lines, I got something that was working. And this was very surprising to me because I didn't expect it to be that easy. And you know, Dancer is great and everything, but it's a huge cannon, and here I was just shooting at a fly. It was really, really not needed. I wasn't using sessions, I wasn't using the logger, I wasn't using most of the features. I was just doing route handling in a very, very simple way. So about a couple of weeks ago, when I was thinking about what I'm going to talk about here, and brushing off some ideas with some people, and I didn't really get to find something to talk about which is Dancer related. And a few weeks, like 2 weeks or 1 week ago, it hit me that this is something that I may want to talk about, because the process of removing Dancer or building building the application by myself from scratch it was a very interesting experience, very educational as well. Now, how many? This is going to be the title for the talk of today. How many people here are sysadmins or were sysadmins? Most of you. Nice. How many of those, or how many of the people here ever built Linux from scratch? Okay, we got a couple of hands. That's nice. So, if you did that, you know how educational experience that is. Like, it doesn't mean that once you build a Linux from scratch, now you're going to build all your production servers from scratch, right? But you do know much more about your patient. You understand it way better after doing something like that and dealing with all the low-level stuff. And that goes for everything. Like, if you want to know better about something, if you build it from scratch, if you go through the process of understanding the lower level bits of it, you have a chance to better use it in the future. And I think that every web developer, and I didn't come, when I joined Booking 6 years ago, or almost 6 years ago, I wasn't a web developer. And so, till today, I don't really define myself as a web developer. And there are a lot of things that I didn't understand or still don't understand. And I never did something like that. I never built a web framework or a web application from nothing. And this experience was really, really good to understand a lot of how to deal with, like, if I use Dancer now, I understand, well, it's a bit of a lie, because I have been dealing with the Dancer core, but let's say I wasn't. Once I do something like that, I would understand better how it works. If you're a web developer that uses Dancer, and you don't understand how Dancer thinks, what is the mindset behind, like how Dancer makes decisions, why decisions were made, then you have less chance of understanding how to approach problems. And if you do, you have a better understanding of the system you're using. You're just going to use it better. That's an opinion. That's totally my opinion. But this is why I want to talk about this. Now, the title is a bit misleading. We're not really talking about building Dancer from scratch. We're talking about building any web framework or anything that you can do as an individual. Like, you're not going to build the whole thing. You're not going to invest the thousands and thousands of man-hour spent on building, debugging, and testing this framework, right? So you're not going to have all the features and all the nice stuff, but you're going to deal with some of the issues which you do when you have something that's working. So let's call it any framework. Doesn't matter. Even that might not be completely true. We may want to call it a web application, because maybe we don't really want to build a framework. In my case, when I removed the Dancer from Panoply, I built a web application. I didn't really build a framework to build applications with. So I just replaced some components to make the application itself work. Now, there is another problem with this title when I say from scratch, because it really depends how low do we want to go. If I want to build a web application, do I also want to deal with the web server? Do I want to build that one? Do I want to deal with all the communication between my application and the server? And I think, well, I thought to myself, let's take it, if we're talking about an educational project, let's take it one step at a time and not do the whole thing at once. Maybe next year I'll stand here and tell you about a TCP server or something that I built to do a lower level thing. But let's go with what we know is already there, supported by the servers and working, which is PSGI and Plack implementation, the utility set of Plack that we know and like. And this is actually what Dancer itself is using, and this should be good enough for us. So we agree that this should be an appropriate title. And at this point, I want to show you some code. And if you want to change the camera, I'm going to sit down. So this thing is going to move a little bit. reverse a little bit of here so you can see the whole line. All right. How much time do I have? Nice. All right. I hope you can read this. If you don't, shout out, then I'll try to do something about it. I cannot promise results, but I'll try. So, what we're going to do here, I'm going to show you some steps in the way of how I build some working application. I warn you in advance, this is highly buggy stuff. It's not going to solve all the problems, and don't use it. It's going to break your production if you try to use this code. I am aware of problems with it. It's just a quick hack to make some things work and show you the idea behind the thing, not solutions. So if you see bugs, you don't really need to even point them out. I know about them. But if you see something very, very severe, please do let me know, so maybe we can hack on this together. I am going to, because I said I'm going to use Plaque, the first thing and the most important thing that I'm going to use is Plaque component. I'm going to inherit from Plaque component. This is basically what every middleware, Plaque middleware is inheriting from. And what Plaque component gives me is a few things that will make my life easier. One, when I call toApp, when I run bring up a dev server, in this case with Plaque up, and I call toApp, it will generate the PSGI app for me. And the only mandatory method that I need to implement in order to make this thing work is the method call, which will be called for every request coming in, giving me the PSGI environment of the request, and I will have to just give a PSGI response in the format that the server will understand and be able to use. So PSGI response will look like, so first the env is just going to be represented as a hash that I can read from. The response is going to be a hash, an array ref, which has the status, and an array ref of some headers, keys and values, and an array ref which contains the content of the response. So this will be the first example, a very, very simple implementation of just one call method that just does nothing but just set one header and tell you what the user agent that was calling is. And we're going to start the server here with a restart monitor on the lib, so things will work for us. This is a live demo, so it's bound to fail at some point, and I hope that we will be spared this time. I'm going to call it with curl. I just wrapped curl with some regular expressions to put some colors in, hopefully to make it more visible. If it's not, shout out, we can quickly change the colors. And when I call this application that we just created, I will send a GET request. I will get, this is, you can see here, are the colors readable? At least the bolded ones. You can read it from the back. Cool. So what we did here, we sent a GET request to slash. We got a 200 that we defined the server to return back. We got the header that we set in the response as well. And the output content that we set as well is sent back to us. Cool. So we got the PSGI application working. Cool stuff. Let's improve it just a little bit. This time I'm going to make use of two Plaque modules, request and response. What I'm using them for is to make my life a little bit easier with dealing with PSGI, because that part is not really interesting. Parsing the PSGI hash of the request or building the response for me. This is something that was done very well by Plaque, and I don't really want to bother myself dealing with that part. So we're just going to use that, and in Dancer we're using those as well. It's really good, it's really cool modules. I'm just creating a new object of the request from the environment that we got. I'm creating a new response object that we were going to use. I'm giving it a default status here. I'm setting the headers through a method called headers, and I'm setting the content through a method called content. Then I'm calling finalize, which will generate the PSGI response. Now, the server already restarted itself when I changed the file. So now if we're calling it, we'll just get the exact same response, this time from that code. Cool. Let's improve this a little bit more. This time, I'm sorry for using JSON XS. I apparently did not see the Sawyer's talk before this one. Yeah, use maybe XS, use cPanel, whatever you want. It's just to simply add some JSON to our application. In this case, we're going to do the exact same thing just with serializing our content that we're sending back to the client as a JSON. I'm just calling encode JSON instead of creating a string. I'm calling encode JSON on a hash, creating an object from it, but with the same content. So this time, if I call the same GET request, I will just get a content type, which is an application JSON string, and the content will be a serialized JSON that the client will get back. Nice, right? We're getting something a bit more interesting. Let's take it up a notch. So one of the things that our application wants to do, like the important parts, or at least the important parts for me, was the ability to do route handling. So route handling, it means that we want to take into account which method was called, and for that, we want to separate how our application behaves, whether it gets a GET call or a POST call. So let's see. I set the GET, I'm checking, I'm adding some conditions, and here I'm checking the method of the request. If it's a GET, I'm going to do the exact same boring thing that I did before, just sending the last example, JSON. If it's a post call, I'm going to just, instead of sending a content, I will just set the status to created or whatever 201 means, because I'm assuming this was like a posting of a resource to a database or something. And if it's anything else, I'm just going to say this method is not allowed. I'll send a 405. Let's try it. So get is, again, the same thing. Nothing changed here. Let's change the method to post. And here, we got the different response, right? There is no content. We got the 201. It works, right? If I'll try something else, let's try delete. It will just give me a 405, and it will say method is not allowed, because that's what we said. Nice. So we are building our way towards doing route handling. Let's do this was fun. All right. So the second part is we want to separate the routes themselves, right? We want to look at the path of the request, because it's not enough to just look at the methods. This time, I'm going to split the path from request path info, and I'm going to split it by slashes, because that's how you split a URL. The GET request, I think, is still the same in this case. Now, I just made some changes to the post. If I make it a little bit smaller, will you still be able to see it? I'll magnify it. I'll zoom in again because I just want to start from the end of it. So just to show you this. So now, if we're going back to the post example, and we're going to send a post request, what will happen? We will get the 401, the unauthorized that we see here. Now, by the way, I'm not saying that these are the correct responses to return. I'm just showing you that what I got is what I set in the application. You can set whatever you want there. So the reason why we got a 401 was because this condition failed, and it means that the path was not /API. So let's fix that in our request. And we add /API, and we post to that API. Now we get the bad request. Now, why is that? Because there is another condition internally which checks the second part of the URL. And in this case, there was a missing, what I called the type, and I got the 400 because that was not there. So let's just add a type. Call it anything. Let's call it answer. And I still got a bad request, but this one is different. This one comes from another condition, because this was checking whether I have a JSON, a valid JSON body with keys in it. So let's fix that as well and send a body with a JSON object. And I think I need to escape the quotes in order to make this work. And this time I got created. Great. So we managed to do path recognition plus the method recognition and execute code that fit the exact same scenario that we wanted to handle. So basically we created a route handler. Not really in the sense of how you do it in Dancer, because I put everything in one big call method, which is disgusting, but let's try to fix that a little bit. The next example would just be that. This time I'm going to make use of another method that Black component gives me, and that is prepare app. Prepare app is basically a hook or a callback that will be executed once when toApp is called by the server, when we are bringing up the server, and this allows me to do a lot of things in it once. In this case, I chose to create a route registry, this hash that I added. It will be global to my application, and then I will be filling it once at initialization time, using a new subroutine that I just put, which will take a method, a route, and a handler, which will be a callback, and just stick it in this hash. And then what we will do is on the call request, we will check whether we will look at the method of the request. Now call looks something more reasonable, right? We don't have all the logic in it. It will just look, it will have a default 404. That's a reasonable thing to do, because that will mean what happened, the status of we didn't find anything will be. And then we look at the method of the request, we'll look at the path of the request, those two things that need to point into the handler, and we will check. Do we have a handler for this method and path? If we do, we call this callback. We get back the content. The reason I'm not setting, I can set the content within the handler itself because I'm passing the response object, but I decided to not do it because I wanted the handler itself to look more like a denser handler where the content is being returned at the end. So I'm just doing it outside of the handler itself here and taking the content that was sent back. It doesn't matter, right? You can do it any way you want. So now what happens is I need to set to register some routes. So I'm going to call in the initialization call of prepare app. I'm going to add two routes. One will handle a GET request with this path, and this subroutine will be called. Internally, it will set the status and just return some content. The post will do something similar. It will just do a 201. It will set the content type and return a JSON response. Let's see if that works. We don't even need to have a body for the post, but let's start with the... So, 404, of course, we don't have this path. The path for GET was hello. So, if we send a GET request to this path, here we got 200 and we got our content. So we had a handler matching our request and executing and returning some content based on that. So we're getting close to something that looks more like a framework here. Let's do the post as well, and just to see the difference. No, because this is not /hello for the post. It's intentional. It was a mistake. And with the correct path, we got the second handler to be run, and we got our 201 application JSON and our JSON content back. This was example number 6. Example 7 will do something very, very similar. It's just some syntactic sugar just to make the adding of the routes look a bit closer to what we're used to. So I just wrapped the calls to add route with get with just sub-get. So just call it like this. Now, this look a bit more familiar, right? It's kind of starting to get a feeling of something we are familiar with and like. This will work the same way. So if I just call hello, I will get hello. Now I have one more example. And I know that at this point everyone is asking themselves, well, at least 50% are asking, well, what the fuck am I talking about? And like, why are you doing this to us? The other half are asking, where are our route parameters, our named parameters? Here they are. I'm going to start with what I must tell you is a very, very, very buggy code. I already found a lot of issues with it, so don't take that as this is how you do it. It's just one broken way that somehow works in my example. So, okay, so we had the condition in call that checked whether we have a registered route. But what if we don't? If we want to have something that matches named parameter, we're not going to have exact match on the route. So this is the else part of the condition. I will take all my routes, all my registered routes for this method. So I'm trimming down the list. I'm going to generate or compile a regular expression from the path, the registered path. And if I see something that starts with a colon and something else until the next slash, I'm just going to convert it into a named capture regular expression, then run it against my current path. If there is a match, I will call that handler, passing it a third argument, which will be the named capture's hash, so it can pull the data from. And now, when I there it is. When I add this route, when I register it in the prepare app, I can do something like hello colon name. And when I want to use it inside the handler, I will just pull it from the captures with the name of whatever I put here in the route itself. Now let's just see that this works. If it doesn't, it's going to be very embarrassing. Hooray! So we got ourselves a named match. Nice. This was my last example, and of course we can extend it more and more and more and do a lot of fun stuff with it, add a lot of other features, and basically play with and learn a lot about how to build a web application just from the Plaque utilities without having to use a framework. But again, I am not advocating not using framework. For your production stuff, do use the framework. There's a lot of knowledge and well, blood, sweat, and tears that were put in those frameworks to make things work for you, to handle cases which you don't even think about when you're focused on your own private problem that you're trying to solve. It's way more secure or anything that you will come up with by yourself. But sometimes you just have to. And in my case, in Panapi, this was not done just for the educational value. It was actually done for the production system. So I had to do it. And yeah, it may not have been the perfect way of doing it, but it was done. If I had time, I would go. I don't have time, right? Nah. Nina says no. So he says 9. What I wanted to do, if I had time, was to show you some parts of the Panapi server code. But what I can just say is that you can, because Panapi is out there on GitHub, you can just look into the code and see some awful way of building a web application from scratch. And maybe give some feedback or pull requests, or I'll give you a commit bit. Don't worry. If you want one, you got it. And you can ask us anything, or yeah, do it because it's fun. Do it because you can learn from it. Do it because the next time you will use a framework, you will better understand how the framework thinks and works. And yeah, know your patient. It will pay off. Believe me. And with that, I think I don't have any more time, so I thank you. And if you have any questions, you can catch me later, and we can talk about it. Cool.